Hi, and welcome back to Hypnagogia's Wicked Mysterious. I'm your host, Danny. This is Lala, and welcome back to our channel. I really don't know why she needs to sit like this every day, all day, but hopefully you can hear me even though her butt is touching my microphone. Anyway, if you're seeing this before Halloween, congratulations. I hustled to get this done. I wrote this episode and then I realized this would make for a really good Halloween one. So here I am. I've got my Halloween shirt on. Say bats. Um, so yeah, I don't really have much to talk about other than, of course, please like and subscribe. It really does help this channel if you are watching on YouTube, and if you could just give it a like and a comment. It really helps the algorithm, and I would really appreciate it. Oh, I forgot. I did have more to say. Last week, I was interviewed by Carolyn Willman. If you remember back from one of our earliest, most popular episodes about Helene Hadsel, the contest queen, Carolyn actually republished all of Helene's books and actually knew her personally, which is very interesting and super cool. She reached out to me for an interview. So if you are interested in hearing all about the creation of Wicked Mysterious, check out her channel. It's Words of Wisdom was the name of the podcast. I did post it on my Facebook page as well as the Facebook group. So if you are interested in that, it is still available as a video. So, with all of that out of the way, let's get into today's mystery. As you know from the title of this episode, we are talking all about the Enfield Poltergeist. This is one of the most terrifying and infamous cases in history and is probably not good for children. So, just a warning, this is one of the scariest episodes we've covered yet. This story has it all: strange voices, levitating children, and a controversy that's lasted decades. This story was also the basis of the movie The Conjuring 2. So let's get into it. In August 1977, a quiet, unassuming house sat at 284 Green Street in Enfield, North London. The Hodgson family had been living there for quite some time when suddenly things started getting weird. Just some background on this home: 284 Green Street was what's known as a council house. A council house is a public housing unit in the United Kingdom that is owned by a local authority and rented to the public at low cost. These are known as social housing or corporation housing. Renting this home was 43-year-old single mother of 4 children, Peggy. Her 4 children were Margaret, who was the eldest daughter, age 13, Janet, who was the second daughter, age 11, and she was the main focus of this poltergeist activity, Johnny, who was 10, and Billy, who was 7. On August 30th, 1977, Margaret and Janet told their mother that they felt like their beds were shaking. Finding no cause for concern, Peggy sent them back to bed. But then, the very next night, the family began hearing knocking sounds. At first, they thought this was just the old house settling. But soon, these noises became impossible to ignore, and they heard knocking on not only the walls, but on the furniture too. Heavy furniture then began moving on its own. Peggy saw a bureau slide across the room, and when she attempted to push it back, she could feel a force opposing her, pushing the bureau back in her direction. She was absolutely terrified, but did not want to sit idly by. She quickly called the police, which is a little strange to me, but that's what she did. The 2 police officers arrived, and one policewoman named Carolyn Heaps even saw a chair slide across the floor without anyone touching it. She could not determine a cause of the chair moving. Of course, they couldn't do much besides make a report, and after all, it's not like they could have arrested a ghost. But it is worth noting that Officer Heaps was so afraid that she refused to return to the house. She provided her account. She said, quote, "On Thursday, 1st September 1977, at approximately 1 a.m., I was on duty in my capacity as policewoman when I received a radio message to 284 Wood Street, Enfield. I went to this address where I found a number of people standing in the living room. I was told by the occupier of this house that strange things had been happening during the last few nights, and they believed that this house was haunted. Myself and another PC entered the living room of the house, and the occupier switched off the lights. Almost immediately, I heard the sound of knocking on the wall that backs onto the next door neighbor's house. There were four distinct taps on the wall and then silence. About 2 minutes later, I heard more tapping, but this time it was coming from a different wall. Again, it was a distinctive peal of four taps. The PC and neighbors checked the walls, attic, and pipes and could not find anything to explain the knockings. The PC and the neighbors all went to the kitchen to check the refrigerator pipes, etc., leaving the family and myself in the living room. The lights in the living room were switched off again, and within a few minutes, the eldest son pointed to a chair that was standing next to a sofa. I looked at the chair and I noticed it was wobbling slightly from side to side. And then I saw the chair slide across the floor toward the kitchen wall. It moved approximately 3 to 4 feet and then came to rest. At no time did it appear to leave the floor. I checked the chair but could find nothing to explain how it had moved. The lights were switched back on. Nothing else happened that night, although we have later reports of disturbances at this address. End quote. After the police left, Peggy called the local paper, the Daily Mirror. Journalist Doug Bentz and photographer Graham Morris arrived on the scene. Seeing no evidence of a haunting, they quickly lost interest and packed up to leave. As they were walking back to their vehicle, a neighbor began shouting to them, "It's happening again." Doug Bentz explains, inside the house, the children's Lego bricks were flying all over the place, going so fast you almost couldn't see them. The kids were screaming, and one of the bricks hit the photographer in the face. They took photos and notes about the scene and left. Graham Morris left with a huge bruise on his face. I find this to be a little odd because even if someone threw a Lego as hard as they could at you, you likely wouldn't end up with a bruise on your face. A Lego doesn't have a whole lot of surface area, but let me know in the comments if you've been personally victimized by a flying Lego. But anyway, the article titled House of Strange Happenings was published on the front page a few days later on September 10th, 1977. Written by George Fallows and Doug Bentz, the article reads, "A family is living in fear of strange goings-on that are driving them from their home. For 2 weeks, they have been terrorized by objects inexplicably shooting through the air or furniture moving for no apparent reason. Two clergymen have blessed the house, but the happenings have only increased. Police are baffled by the phenomena, and one policewoman is too scared to return to the house." For 4 days, Mirror reporters George Fallows and Doug Bentz and photographers David Thorpe and Graham Morris joined a psychic expert in keeping watch. In the last 8 days, a saucer has jumped across the kitchen, furniture has moved, and marbles and toy building bricks have shot through the air at the 60-year-old house in Enfield, Middlesex. One brick hit Morris in the head. Children's storybooks in a bedroom were seen to fly through the air by friends of the family. Police heard knockings which they could not explain, although the lights were off, so there's that. And the policewoman saw a chair move on its own. Fallows says, having kept an observation at the house for 4 successive nights, I believe abnormal happenings are occurring. I have seen nothing unusual, but I have heard knocks and I've been present when strange occurrences have been witnessed by others in the back bedroom. Photographer Morris says, I was sent to what I was told was a haunted house. When I went into the living room, I saw toy bricks flying through the air. One of them hit me on the head. Nobody seemed to be throwing them. They were coming at the speed of bullets. I saw at least 3 and attempted to photograph them, but they were too fast for me. Reporter Bent says, I saw a yellow brick hit the wall where I almost lost it in the flash from Morris's camera. I did not see the brick that hit him on the head and missed a third that others saw. In an effort to unravel the mystery, the Daily Mirror called in Maurice Gross, a member from the Society for Psychical Research, one of the most reputable organizations in the field. Mr. Gross said, I believe that genuine poltergeist type phenomena is occurring, but it does not mean it's a haunted house. This type of manifestation is attached to people, not places. Shortly after Mr. Gross began investigating, a 10-year-old son of the family returned to the residential school and the strange happenings ceased. So it sounds like they thought it was attached to the son or caused by the son at first. It goes on to say for 48 hours, nothing unusual took place. Then on Wednesday night, a 10-year-old girl reported that a marble had flown through the air in her bedroom. The article's cut off, but I'll read until it stops. Mr. Gross and Fallows returned to the house. They were joined by Benson Thorpe. In the early hours of Thursday, they heard a bump and found a book which had been on the girl's mantelpiece in the girl's bedroom. And it was on the floor. They replaced it. Maurice Gross, who was an investigator with the Society of Psychical Research, arrived at the home in early September 1977, and he began to document the events. Soon after, he was joined by colleague Guy Lyon Playfair. They witnessed what was described as violent poltergeist activity, such as doors opening and closing on their own, small fires starting with no apparent cause and then going out, and picture frames being torn off the walls, along with strange, unexplained noises. The activity seemed to center around the 11-year-old Janet. After another month went by, Janet began entering into strange trance-like states in which she appeared to be possessed. A strange voice was coming out of the little girl, which said abusive and obscene things. The voice was not Janet's and was deep, masculine, and gruff. It identified itself as Bill Wilkins, the previous resident of the home. Bill had died while sitting in a chair in the living room of the home from a brain hemorrhage. Then Janet began levitating. A neighbor, as well as one of the investigators, witnessed Janet's body float above her bed. A remote camera took a photo that investigators say showed Janet levitating, but many skeptics have said it looks like Janet was just jumping off the bed. And it does kind of look like she's jumping, as her knees are bent and her body is upright. It's not as though she was shown in the air in a lying position. By December 1977, as Janet's episodes of being possessed by Bill continued, she was assessed by medical staff. They determined that speaking in such a deep voice would be quite difficult for a young girl. Speaking in this manner for a prolonged period of time would surely damage her vocal cords, but they found no evidence at all of damage. It was at this time that the voice explained Bill's cause of death. The activity in the house had escalated into pure chaos, with furniture being completely overturned and marbles and other objects flying through the air. Here's a clip of the voice that came out of Janet.
Come on, say it for me, Dr. Bellow.
Dr. Bellow. Right, that's good. Shut up, that door. I'm 72 years old. I come from Jewel Park, graveyard. And I have right near the church where Rita lives.
At the beginning of 1978, the episodes of Janet being possessed became more and more frequent. Investigators noted that her eyes would roll to the back of her head and only the whites of her eyes could be seen. Witnesses described seeing her body twist and bend into unnatural positions, at times appearing to be almost boneless. Her body would contort in ways that looked physically painful or impossible for a child of her age. Onlookers reported that she could bend backwards with her head almost touching her feet or twisting her limbs at odd angles. She would thrash violently, and while doing so, the activity in the house would increase, with items being strewn about, leaving the house in complete disarray. They also noted that it was near impossible to restrain Janet, despite her being a very slight 11-year-old girl. Witnesses also said that Janet could throw chairs across the room with ease, displaying strength not at all normal for a child or even a grown man. During these possessions, the supposed voice of Bill Wilkins was prominent. They were not short conversations either. The voice of Bill would spend hours speaking to investigators. Even though the girl looked conscious and alert, Janet would have no recollection of any conversation with the researchers. Not only did the voice sound nothing like the little girl's, but the cadence and speech used was incredibly unsettling to researchers. There is no publicly available transcript of the interview with Bill/Janet, but some of the information is known. The voice did say, "My name is Bill, I lived here, and I died in that chair in the corner downstairs," which was true. The voice claimed that Bill had gone blind before he died and had passed out just before the hemorrhage took his life. This was consistent with the symptoms of a fatal brain hemorrhage where a person might lose consciousness before dying. The Bill voice often interrupted questions and would sometimes speak in a hostile or annoyed manner, as though it didn't want to be bothered. In one instance, when Maurice Grosse asked if the voice could prove that it was real and not a trick, Bill responded with aggression, saying, "I'm invisible, ain't I?" There was also moments of humor and mockery where Bill would mimic the voices of the investigators or laugh at their questions, which made the situation even more bizarre and difficult to analyze. When asked about his presence in the house, the voice responded, "I'm a ghost, Ghost." When asked by Playfair why he was still in the house, the voice responded, "This is my house, go away." The voice allegedly made inappropriate and mocking comments regarding Janet's menstrual cycle. It wasn't just Bill whose voice came out of Janet's body. She was heard speaking in a wide range of accents, dialects, and languages, and on one occasion, she switched between different accents rapidly. Guy Lyon Playfair documented over 100 different voices coming through Janet. He stated that some of these voices were intelligible, while others were incoherent or speaking in what sounded like gibberish. Around this time, some observers and investigators began to grow skeptical. Janet was caught bending spoons and admitted to faking some of the phenomena to test if the investigators would notice. However, she insisted that most of the events were real. So, this is where I start to believe that all of this was a hoax perpetrated by Janet. Just imagine if this were actually real and you're an 11-year-old girl being told that you're saying and doing things you don't remember. You're seeing your mother and siblings terrified and disturbed and having objects inexplicably move around. The last thing I'd be doing is trying to trick investigators. You'd want them on your side to help you find an answer. You'd want their advice on how to make it stop. And above all else, you'd want them to believe you. By the fall of 1978, a priest was sent to the house to attempt an exorcism, which Janet, or the entity taking over her body, really wanted nothing to do with. The activity in the home and the possessions themselves seemed to be provoked by the presence of the clergyman. Toward the end of the year, activity seemed to die down. Gross and Playfair continued to observe and record phenomena, but as the months went on, the events became less and less frequent. During this time, several parapsychologists and researchers from the SPR, as well as independent investigators, visited the house. Some left convinced that the events were paranormal in nature, while others were skeptical, believing it to be a case of trickery or a psychological problem with Janet. In fact, Janet was sent to a psychiatric hospital for a short time to assess her mental health, but nothing abnormal was found. When she returned home, the disturbances had significantly lessened. There were a few final outbursts of poltergeist like activity, but by mid 1979, the haunting had almost entirely stopped. The family continued to live in the house, but they reported no further disturbances of significance. So, what is a poltergeist anyway? The phenomena has been widely researched, and the documented information is fascinating. Derived from the German words poltern, which means to make noise, and Geist, which means spirit, they're a type of paranormal phenomenon typically associated with just that. Physical disturbances, such as objects being moved or thrown, loud noises, and other unexplained activity, are the hallmarks of this phenomenon. But unlike other hauntings, which may involve apparitions or ghostly figures, poltergeist activity is known for its aggressive and disruptive nature. Poltergeists are usually distinguished by a range of disturbing activities, which include object movement, knocking sounds, thrown objects, electrical disturbances, so lights flickering on and off, electrical devices malfunctioning, radios or TVs turning themselves on and off, physical attacks, and unexplained voices. This phenomenon is actually nowhere near new. In fact, it goes back thousands of years. In ancient Egypt, the dead were believed to have a strong influence over the living. When disturbances occurred in homes, such as strange noises or objects moving, they were often interpreted as signs of displeased spirits, especially those of ancestors. Rituals were performed to appease these spirits. During the medieval period, supernatural disturbances were commonly associated with the work of demons, witches, or malevolent spirits. This is because the Christian worldview dominated much of Europe, and any strange phenomena were often interpreted through the lens of religious belief or by fear of witches. Even though it's arguably one of the most famous cases, the Enfield Poltergeist is not the first or the only documented case. In 1661, one of the earliest well documented cases of poltergeist activity occurred in Tedworth, England. A local landowner named John Mapawson seized a drum from a wandering drummer. Shortly after, Mapawson's house was plagued by strange drumming noises, objects moving, and violent disturbances, leading many to believe that the drummer had cursed the house. This case became widely discussed and was considered hard evidence of malevolent forces at work. In 1716, the Wesley family, whose home was in Epworth, England, was allegedly haunted by a poltergeist for months. The disturbances included loud knocking sounds, strange noises, and furniture moving on its own. The poltergeist was believed to target John Wesley, who later became the founder of Methodism. The case remains one of the most well documented poltergeist events from this period, with numerous witness accounts. From 1817 to 1821, a family in Tennessee was tormented by an unseen entity that made strange noises, moved objects, and physically assaulted family members, most notably John Bell and his daughter Betsy. This was known as the Bell Witch. For an entire decade, from 1921 to 1939, Borley Rectory was plagued by various paranormal events, including poltergeist activity like stones being thrown, again, objects moving, and a strange knocking sound. It became known as the most haunted house in England. In 1967, in a law office in Rosenheim, Germany, phones would ring inexplicably, lights would flicker, and furniture would move. It was one of the few cases investigated and documented by physicists and other scientists. But what if poltergeist activity isn't actually a type of haunting? What if it's caused by a specific person? There is a theory that this phenomenon is linked to and unintentionally caused by a person living in the home where it occurs. This individual is known as the poltergeist agent. These people all share some commonalities. Most poltergeist agents are young, often between the ages of 10 and 20, and many cases are females. Some researchers believe that the emotional and hormonal changes associated with puberty contribute to the release of psychokinetic energy, which we will get to in a moment. Another factor is that the agent may be experiencing high levels of emotional stress or trauma. This can include family issues like divorce, abuse, or neglect, school related stress, grief, or other significant emotional burdens. These underlying issues may contribute to the buildup of repressed energy, which then manifests as poltergeist activity. And lastly, unawareness. Despite being at the center of the activity, the agent usually have no idea that they're part of it. They may even be victims of the phenomena, experiencing fear or confusion over the disturbances around them. Some researchers believe that the phenomenon is caused by a release of psychokinetic energy. Psychokinesis, or PK, refers to the ability to influence physical objects using the mind alone, without any physical interaction. PK is not only the movement of objects, but can also be a change in temperature of an object, as seen in the Ingo Swann episode, or thoughtography, as seen in the Phases of Belmez episode. But in the case of poltergeists, recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis, also known as RSPK, is the term used to describe unconscious psychokinetic activity that seems to occur repeatedly, often around the same individual. In most RSPK cases, the individual at the center of the activity is thought to be under significant emotional or psychological stress. This stress, especially when not properly expressed, may unconsciously manifest as energy that disrupts the environment around them. Adolescents, particularly those going through puberty, are often linked to poltergeist activity because of the intense emotional upheavals they experience. The theory is that these emotions create a form of psychic energy that can affect the physical environment. But unlike traditional psychokinesis, where someone might deliberately try to move an object with their mind, RSPK occurs without the person's awareness. The agent typically doesn't realize that they're causing the disturbances. In fact, they often experience the phenomena as frightening and out of their control. Despite all the other documented cases of poltergeists, not all members of the Society for Psychical Research were convinced that this is what was happening in Enfield. Anita Gregory and John Beloff, two other SPR investigators, were skeptical of Gross and Playfair's findings. Gregory believed that the girls were fabricating a lot of the activity and cited evidence of trickery, such as Janet's ability to throw objects when no one was watching. She also dismissed the levitation photos, arguing that Janet could have simply jumped off the bed. In fact, in the photo, it appears that that's just what she was doing. Gregory also pointed out that many of the reports of events happened when no investigators were present, or they could be explained by pranks or just misperception. Janet was an 11-year-old girl going through a very difficult time. The Hodgson family was struggling financially, and Janet's parents were separated, causing stress and emotional turmoil. Psychologists have suggested that Janet's behavior could be attributed to attention seeking or psychological distress. Interestingly, though, these factors are also supposed causes of RSPK outbursts. While the deep voice speaking through Janet sounded unnatural, skeptics argue that it could have been a result of ventriloquism or vocal cord manipulation. Speech therapists and voice experts have pointed out that young children can produce sounds if trained or if they have an unusual ability to control their vocal cords. Bill's son confirmed that Bill was real and that he did die there, and that he did in fact die from a brain hemorrhage. But other things didn't add up. Details about Bill's life were murky, unspecific, or just wrong. It's thought that Janet heard fragments of truth about Bill's death, either from neighbors or someone else, and either used the information to prank everyone or perhaps unconsciously used the information during an episode of RSPK. But it's also worth noting that Bill's son didn't think the details of his death were publicly known. Eyewitness accounts are notoriously unreliable, and skeptics will entirely dismiss the neighbors' accounts as misremembering or misperception. The voice's mention of Janet's menstrual cycle is also a topic of debate, as it seems to be out of place and somewhat unheard of in other hauntings or possession cases. This led many to the conclusion that Janice had conscious participation, or at the very least, this was a manifestation of Janet's subconscious mind and the trauma many girls experience during a time of change and confusion. But on the other hand, the phenomena was witnessed and corroborated independently by multiple witnesses. Though eyewitness testimonies aren't evidence by any means, the fact that multiple people saw it does give it a little more weight. Gross, while completely alone in a room, witnessed a framed certificate fly off the wall. A teapot shook wildly on the stove, despite nothing else nearby vibrating or shaking, and a bathroom door slammed shut and opened again, all with nobody nearby. Some of these occurrences happened simultaneously. If it did actually happen, it's likely they wouldn't have tricked multiple adults numerous times. I would assume that the doors were checked for string or other things of that nature. A woman by the name of Hazel Short, a crossing guard who worked nearby, didn't seem to have a prior knowledge of the goings on inside the Hodgson home. She kept her handheld stop sign, also called a lollipop sign, under a shrub near the home. She is sometimes referred to as the lollipop lady. She explains, quote, I was standing there looking at the house when all of a sudden a couple of books came flying across and hit the window. It was so sudden. I heard the noise because it was so quiet, there was no traffic, and it made me jump. Then, after a little while, I saw Janet. I don't know if there's a bed underneath that window, but she was going up and down bodily as though someone was tossing her up and down bodily in a horizontal position, like as if someone had got a hold of her legs and back and was throwing her up and down. I definitely saw her come up at about window height. I thought if she was bouncing, she'd bounce from her feet. She wouldn't be able to get enough power to bounce off her back to come that high. My friend could see her as well. We could both see her. In later interviews, as an adult, Janet Hodgson reflected on the events, claiming that while some of the things had been exaggerated, much of what happened in the house was real. She maintained that the paranormal phenomena were genuine and that she had not been in control of herself during the possession episodes. There's a lot of evidence for and against the Enfield poltergeist. I think that Janet was probably having outbursts of RSPK that she couldn't control due to what she was going through both in her body and in her life. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I hope you have a very happy Halloween, and I will see you in a few weeks.